Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Reframable Podcast, the podcast that brings you people's stories and ideas about how we can work to reframe our relationship, not just with alcohol, but with stress, anxiety, relationships, enjoyment, and so much more. Because changing our relationship with alcohol is about so much more than changing the contents of our glass. This podcast is brought to you by the Reframe app. Reframe is the #1 iOS and Android app to help you cut back or quit drinking alcohol. It uses neuroscience to reframe your relationship with alcohol and unlock the healthiest, happiest you. My name is Kevin Bellack. I'm a certified professional recovery coach and the head of coaching at the Reframe app.
Yeah, and I'm Frank Spinelli. I'm a coach here at Reframe with my background in trauma and health. I'm also a physician working in patient-focused research. I'm really glad to be here again.
Awesome, Frank. Today, we're joined by fellow Reframer Max Miller. Max is about 4.5 years sober. He works in the insurance industry and lives in Indianapolis with his wife, 10 years, and their 2-year-old daughter. He's passionate about people, their stories, and self-improvement, just trying to become the best version of himself every day. Max, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, thanks for joining us on the show and sharing your story with us here today. I'm excited to hear it. Where we at here? I don't want to throw out dates because I don't know when this will be released, but
we're in the spring.
We're in the spring hitting I know we were just talking about definitely hitting our stride here in Cleveland as far as warm weather coming, but how have things been going?
Yeah. I mean, first I'd like to just say, anytime I get to share my story, it's such an honor because I remember being not sober yet, but knowing that I need to get help and I need to get this in gear because the wheels are coming off. And I got to hear stories, and in particular, Kevin, I heard your story, and just thought, man, if he could do it. And I don't know how many years you're sober now, but I think you were a couple years sober, maybe. Are you?
Yeah, I just
had
hit
an
last
anniversary.
week. Yeah, just last week it was 7 years.
Yeah. So you were probably almost 3 years
Yeah.
sober. And I thought, man, if he can do it, I think I can do it too. And then, that was the thing that really gave me hope. And I guess if there's one thing, if you're listening to this podcast today, if there's one thing, that I hope that you get from this podcast is that your best days are not behind you. There is hope. There is a future. Though you cannot see it and you do not feel it, if you choose to hop on that app every day and do those daily tasks and join the meetings and get in the community. And you don't have to call yourself an alcoholic. You can say whatever. You can just say, hey, I'm not drinking. That's fine. It's nobody's. If you choose to do that, you can be happy. And that was, really when I decided not to drink or decided to be sober, I was like, I couldn't visualize what a life not sober really looked like. And the vision that I had was sad and depressing because, I had kind of centered my life around having fun with alcohol. And I thought it was fun. I did. But, you learn about neuroplasticity and you learn about dopamine and how the brain changes and your sleep. And as you remove alcohol from your life, the changes that you start to notice in your mental state changes and it becomes possible. So that's why I really like, your intro where you say it's much more than just changing the contents of your glass.
Yeah.
And that couldn't be more true. Really there's so much more than just choosing not to drink. You're choosing to take your life back and get back in the driver's seat of life. And that's what I would say. If there's one thing you get from this podcast, it is that, hey, your best days are not behind you and there is hope. And so my hope in sharing my story and why I always take these opportunities is that if one person hears this and they decide to make a change, then I've done my job. And that's really important in this.
Yeah. Even if it's just, there's deciding to make a change, but there's even just like I didn't know that I could go about it that way, or I didn't know, it's just even planting the seed to give somebody that thought of, oh, well, yes, it doesn't have to be this way that I was thinking or that way. Yeah, because we get stuck in that, I think. Just talking with maybe my therapist this week. I can't remember no, someone else this past weekend. About like you get stuck in the comfort zone. We always call it, but it's not the comfort zone. It can be very uncomfortable, but it's the familiar, right? So it's that familiar zone, and how do we break out of that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. There's something that you said that struck me. And by the way, we just said that we've never met. So it's really nice to meet you and for you to share your story and how far you've come. One of the things that you reminded me of, which I had to speak about recently, is this identity of calling yourself an alcoholic. Like, you can do that if you'd like, or you don't have to do that. And I think a lot of younger people, especially like Gen Zers, they have a problem with that identity. They feel it's like a binary. It's either all or nothing. I'm either an alcoholic or I'm not. And a lot of people gravitate towards platforms like Reframe only because it's just giving you options. And you talked about neuroplasticity. It talks about the science. And I'm curious to know, did you know that going in, or did you just say, well, let me start somewhere? And then you're like, wow, oh my God, and my mind's blown about all this science that I'm getting with these daily tasks.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I knew that it was doing something to my brain and my body. I mean, I felt like crap. So I knew there was something going on there, learning. So when I went into it, no, I didn't really know that I was going to learn about, dopamine and neuroplasticity and those things. So I love to learn. Like, ask my wife. I'm always like telling her these random facts that don't pertain to anything or make any difference in anybody's life. But I think it's so interesting. And so when that fit with my personality really well, being able to, I'm very goal oriented. I'm in sales. So I set, targets and I run after them. Like, my hair's on fire. I don't have any.
Job
That's
succeeded.
why it's
Yeah.
not.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Reframe app just really fit well with it. And it takes the shame, to me, it took the shame away, right? Because I thought, well, oh, there's all these people that can drink and don't need to moderate and don't need to like have conversations with them about how many drinks they're going to have. I must be broken. And when I started learning that, okay, there's dopamine, there's neuroplasticity and all those things, we've hit on those two things. There's more than that, but, and just talk about habits, habit formation. I was like, okay, I'm working this system the way that the way I was designed to work. What if I got addicted to being sober? What if I got addicted to, working out and trying to be honest and trying to be the person that I want to become? What if I put that much effort? See, the thing about someone who drinks every day or someone who's an alcoholic, alcohol use disorder, whatever, someone who frequently goes back to alcohol, they have a skill, and that is discipline. Because whether they feel good or not, they're going to come back. You're going to come back to that bottle, and you can harness that skill in the good. The same thing that got you there can get you out of it. And so if you just commit to, hey, this sucks and I've created this mess, but I'm going to get some help and I'm going to get out of this. And, I tried to moderate. I went down that path and just didn't work. Never worked for me, and I know some people, they can moderate, and sometimes that's a way to get the ball rolling, right? Harm reduction. That's great. You know, any way that you can. And I remember being like, I bought these big boxes. Like, you go to Costco, you can buy a big old box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. And I was going through a big box of those a week. And I went, I don't care. I don't care if I eat 2 boxes of these a week. I'm not drinking. And that's a win. Right now, I gained some in the midsection for that. But hey, I wasn't drinking.
Yeah.
So
I literally pointed at Costco yesterday at the giant box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch because that's my wife's favorite. And she's like, no, just keep walking. I don't need that. Yeah.
trap.
Yeah, that is a trap, and they make it so big you can't resist. That's another thing that you said. You're just giving out these pearls. One of the one of the equalizers for everyone that joins Reframe or who is in recovery, whether it's with AA or not, is the guilt and the shame. And you get stuck. Like you were saying, you're committed to it and you know you're going to drink, but you're also trapped in this prison. And one of the distinctions that was really enlightening is that this isn't about a moral failing. This is actually about neuroscience. Your body is craving dopamine and you need to give it to it. And when you get out of that loop, as you were describing, you realize I can actually become addicted to working out and I can become addicted to being sober. How long did it take you to make that distinction? Like, oh, I'm not, this is not a shameful thing that I've done something terrible and I deserve better. And it's more than just alcohol. I have a whole life I can live.
Well, I guess maybe I should back up a little bit, and one thing I would really, really, really like to point out is, well, you know, my wife, and I might get a little emotional, but my wife stuck by my side, and she prayed for me, and she is really one of my rocks, and I'm indebted to her and thankful to her for because the alcohol doesn't just affect the individual, it affects your friends and your family. I am so thankful that my wife did stick with me. And I hadn't, I didn't get the DUI. I didn't get I wasn't abusive. It wasn't domestic abuse. I was high functioning. You asked when did the switch turn? I went to school. I have a degree in exercise science. I was a CrossFit coach, functioning alcoholic. So, I was already committed to working out and I worked out hungover and everything. So I guess when I realized that, I looked at it as just take it in steps. Like really the number one goal is just not to drink. So do whatever you can do to not drink. And I did hot yoga. I run half marathons. I do a ton of walking. I read books, coffee with friends.
8 boxes of Cinnamon Toast Crunch.
8 boxes of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. I mean,
What does it take?
yeah, it's really because and the revelation I had when I realized I needed to stop drinking was I woke up one morning, it was a Sunday, and it wasn't a good situation. And I felt what it felt like to be dead. And I felt like, man, if I don't make a change, this is going to kill me. And I really believed it with my whole being that if I did not change, I'm going to die. And so I felt like what it felt like to be dead for just a sliver. I went to my wife and I said, "Hey, I'll never drink again." Sunday, I'm a believer. So we went to church and I went to the front desk and I said, "Hey, you guys got to get me help or I'm going to die." And, they had a counselor there. So I started seeing a counselor and then they also had a Celebrate Recovery. And so I started attending that weekly and got a sponsor and started getting my coins, my tokens. And I did a 12-month study, just a men's group. You meet, once a week for a whole year. And you're going through material, and learning about yourself. And, I really just learned that, the alcohol was the solution, wasn't the problem. And until it became a problem, right?
Yeah.
It was solving an issue. So
Yeah.
I was using it to solve a problem until all of a sudden the consequences were so negative that I was forced to learn how to cope, and so it's like I just look at it like I had an issue, right? I had trauma, childhood trauma, we all have it. We all have different traumas.
Mhm.
And, I was a hurt little boy and I was using alcohol to cope. And so when I realized that the problem isn't the problem, it's how I'm choosing to deal with it. And so what I've had to learn in sobriety is, okay, I have to solve my problems with everything else other than alcohol, drugs, or alcohol, right? What are healthy coping mechanisms? And that's what Reframe gave me healthy coping mechanisms. like the daily meetings and the daily tasks. And
Yeah, and from there, I mean, and by doing the daily meetings and or just any meetings and doing the tasks, like you learn more tools, right? And by doing that, you add to that, yeah, that you,
Arsenal or yeah,
yeah, toolbox,
tool
toolkit,
bag,
whatever we
yeah,
want to call it,
toolkit.
because like as you just alluded to, alcohol is a tool, right? I mean, it is something that we can use to, which might start obviously in this way where I would be like, yeah, I drank socially. I binge drank in college and all that, but I would come home from work stressed and I had a beer and I felt better. It's like, okay, my brain was like, okay, do that again, you know? But it is that it does start in a lot of those types of ways and then grows into something that's, Frank, you alluded before about like not being a moral failing. And yeah, because it's an addictive drug, pushed everywhere. It's the only one
Yeah.
who, I don't know if anybody knows who actually said this line, but it's like the only drug you have to justify not taking. Um,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think that's one of the key issues. And when I was listening to you, Max, and I am really very sorry to hear about your childhood. And I know you said everybody, but it's what matters is your experience, obviously. And one of the things, what you just said, Kevin, what other product is glamorized, is this, we have nostalgia for it. Remember the time we all got wasted in college? Like there's a fondness of it, even though we all woke up and it was
Tradition,
discussed. Yeah, a tradition. How do you even say Happy New Year without clinking a glass? Even amongst us, we're Italian, we can't clink water. It has to be alcohol, otherwise it's bad luck. So there are all of these traditions and myths and
superstitions.
nostalgic and superstitions that are attached to it. It's really unbelievable. There aren't more. The only other product that's just probably as addictive and not good for you is sugar, by the way. What a funny thing that when folks give up alcohol, the transfer addiction that is most common is sugar. So, it's really interesting. What I really love about your story is that lucky you found this group, this men's group who were like unpacking your lies. And I have to say, the men's group, I don't host it very often because of the time, but I felt like it was so necessary for men to get together. They felt very much more comfortable with each other to share. And I can't imagine how that was for you. Do you think that was like the turning point for you?
yeah, because okay, so I read I think it's called I've read lots of books recently. I just started reading. I read one book a month. I love reading. It's easy. If you read 10 pages a day and your book's under 300 pages, you can read a book a month. But they said that the feeling loneliness is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day for your health. Okay, and so what does that mean? That means that we were made for connection. And so when we're disconnected, alcohol isolates you because it's like, hey, do I want to, go to my cousin's baseball game, or do I want to? That's probably a bad example, but do I want to go out, or would I rather stay in and have some drinks? Be by myself. Like it pulls you away. It can pull you away. And so the men's group for me was, you know, like I said, I tried to moderate. I tried to do it on my own, and I thought I could do it. Failed miserably because I never got around other people who said, "Hey, you know what? I have that same problem." And and it once you start realizing that you're not the only one, then you're like, okay, there's something here. I'm not the only one that's struggling with this. And maybe if we all of us together stick together, maybe we could all accomplish our goal of not,
Yeah.
using and abusing. And so I remember let's see, I would have been 28. Yeah, 28 at the time. And, there were men from all different walks of life. And I was the youngest one. Some of them in the group were, in their 60s on their second marriage, been in prison. And, you know, s- they looked at me and they were like, I wish when I was 28 years old that I had the epiphany that you have now. And I thank God that I figured it out, or that I had that opportunity to wake up because some people don't. Some people, rock bottom is when you stop digging.
Yeah.
and everybody's rock bottom, because that's what people will say. They go, that's got to be his rock bottom. That, that first DUI, I thought for sure that I got it.
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. Not everybody needs this DUI accident. I mean, the goal is not to have that. And you fortunately did not have to go through that to realize that. The other thing you said that when you talked about shame, I keep thinking so much of you guys read a lot, but one of the books that stands out for me most is Brene Brown's I thought it was me or something. I'm messing up the title. I'll look it up. And it's about shame, which I did a lot of research, and her saying is the only antidote to shame is connection. It thrives in the isolation, and that's what alcohol does. A lot of times when we talk about the shame spiral, it begins with the use or the misuse or the slip ups or whatever you call it. And then the second part is the self incrimination. You're a mess. You always do this. I knew you weren't going to be able to stick to it. The whole part of that cycle that really matters most is not the slip up. It's the incrimination. It's the voice that tells you you're worthless. And so the only way to break that cycle is the connectivity. So finding that men's group and realizing, what a gift this was. I mean, I guess for you, what a blessing it was, to really find them at 28, and also for you to have a wife. I mean, that's amazing that you have a partner. We forget about the sphere of influence. We always think whenever I work with people, and I don't know, Kevin, if you're like this, when we talk about our why, I always say the why has to be specific, but it has to be about you. The first one has to be about you. The second part could be my wife, my kids, whatever. But the first part is, why do you want to stop drinking, or why do you want to mindfully moderate? So that's really great. So you said, how long were you in that group with the
It was
men?
a whole year of Saturday mornings, couple hours every Saturday, and had got a sponsor, and that was just somebody that had been sober for a while and was able to sort of take you under their wing, and that was really important because I leaned on him a lot in the beginning, lots of phone calls. When you're trying, like when you're trying to change the trajectory, like, because you think that your decision to not drink is one decision, like, I'm not drinking. If you could zoom out, like if I, you know, took myself 4.5 years backwards and went, this would be your life 4.5 years from now, I wouldn't believe you. I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I gave up one thing and I gained everything. And with, alcohol says, hey, keep me with you. You're gonna get some happiness. You're gonna
Yeah,
have
it's your
fun.
frenemy. It
Yeah.
lies.
And you were talking about the commercials, or I don't know if you were talking about the commercials or not, but just the way alcohol's marketed, right?
Sure. Yeah.
It's like show the and the marketing, show everybody the morning after waking up after the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Put that on the video, you know?
Yeah.
Waking up, not being able to get up because your alarm's going off, throwing up, feeling like crap, You're operating at such a low vibration, such a low level of existence. Like what you're doing is, the way I look at it is, you're taking the volume on your life and you're just turning it down. And so everything in your life, your potential, like, I love being sober. I'm in the business world, with sales and stuff. And I love being sober because I know that I get 7 out of 7 days of my week to be clear minded and work towards my goals. Where if my,
Sharp.
if my
Yeah.
competitor is, let's say he's drinking Friday night, Saturday night, well, he's got 5 out of 7 days. I'm going to get 2 extra days on you. It's a competitive advantage.
Yeah,
And
it's speaking of that, how did you navigate that? Because sales, to me, whenever I'm working with people in sales, I mean, I just came back from a 2-day meeting where we were with my company, and the alcohol is everywhere and it's free. And I was wondering, what are some of the tips that you learned to navigate being around your colleagues and who are drinking and you're not?
well, first of all, that's a great question. In the beginning, I really demonized the alcohol. And to me, it is a demon, right? It it wants to suck my soul away, right? But that's my experience. And so, when I'm around other people that like to drink or whatever, like, I really don't care about your relationship with alcohol. I don't. But for me, I can't drink. So I'm not going to be ashamed of that, And so I just get I have my favorite drink is seltzer water with a lime and a splash of cranberry.
Hmm.
It's refreshing, it's tasty, and yeah, maybe it looks a little fruity, but I'm just not ashamed because who I am without alcohol is such a better version of myself that, you don't have to look at people and say, "I'm not drinking." Like, really, nobody really cares about what you're drinking. Like, people don't like, it's
Yeah.
you, it's your insecurity. It's my insecurity of what I think other people think about me. But the reality is everybody's sitting there wondering what everybody's thinking about them. So if I just don't care, then I don't have to worry about it because most people are worried about themselves.
Yeah. They're
And
worried. They're looking for, okay, when's the server coming back? I need another drink.
yeah.
Uh, that's what I was worried about.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of type A people that, to be honest with you, it might be a little more enjoyable to have a conversation with them after they've had a drink because then they can converse. I'm naturally extroverted, and what I won't do is I won't stay out late. So once somebody starts repeating themselves or slurring their words or they get a little wobbly, see ya. I'm going back to my hotel. I'll get a Ben and Jerry's. And, like, seriously, I do. I get Ben& and Jerry's, like, when I'm traveling, it's Ben& and Jerry's, and I'll get Longhorn Steakhouse, like, I make it fun, you know? I do.
Yeah, that's so funny because you bring up such a good point. I was at this meeting. I'm going to try not to say anybody, but somebody big came over to the table where we were sitting, and you could just tell just from the gesticulations. Okay, this guy's in it. And you know where I go in my head? I go in my head, I don't want him to be embarrassed tomorrow. So I make up some excuse after like a little bit of conversation. I'm like, oh, I got to use the restroom, and I get out of there. I find like I'm like you. Once you start repeating yourself, or once I hear the slurring, I'm like, you know what? This would be a good time for me to check out. And so I'm going to go to the bathroom, or I'm going to, going to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's a good tip.
Well, and it's just understanding, like, my boundaries are for me. They're to keep me safe, and the people that love you and care about you are gonna respect your boundaries. And the people that don't love you and don't care about you won't respect your boundaries. So, it's my job to make sure that I'm safe, number one. And so I gotta put, my wife and I, early sobriety, my wife is such a team player. We came up with a game plan when we would go to events and stuff. And, we were fortunate that we didn't really get put in that position all too often. But in early sobriety, I was a head case. I couldn't go out, I couldn't go to restaurants, I couldn't be around it. I really, really struggled. And I remember my wife being like, "Is this what it's gonna be like? Like, is this how you're gonna be?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "No, I promise." I'm like, my brain is recalibrating. I
Yeah.
It's
promise
true.
it'll get better." And, sure enough, it did, but we had a plan, and her and I came up with, and she was with me in that. And, well, she was never really a drinker. I mean, she was always like a one drink kinda woman anyways. So when I stopped, she was like, "Well, I might as well just not drink either because I don't I sleep better and feel better." And so neither of us drink, and we love it.
Yeah. I think that's such a important thing to keep in mind there is like, I mean, I thought a lot of people do think that it's like, is this how it's going to be forever? And what your wife said there, it's like, oh shit, like, well, this looks like it's going to suck. Like, and that's what we think. But, it's just that it goes back to that familiar thing. We just don't know necessarily what it's going to look like or when we might be ready. But yeah, making sure that you're doing what you need to take care of yourself is important. And knowing that it's not always going to be that way. Like, you planning and doing that, okay, let's talk through the plan for tonight. Let's go through that. Are we going to have to do this every time? No, because you get better, as with anything, you get better at doing that. And then you just look at it and be like, the next time it's like, you can use that information for that and so on. And it just becomes a lot easier. But you have to learn, like, how long were you drinking? I was drinking like 20 plus years. It was going to take a little bit of time to adjust the way I did things, right? So giving ourselves that space, so important. Yeah.
I
And
think, the other part, don't you think, like you brought up something else, when you go out and you're not drinking, people don't care. They really don't. And we think they do because they're like, he must have a problem. That's why, that's what we think is the inner voice in our heads. But it's so clear that, One of the things I talked about as well is like you just have to find what is the joy of the missing out. Like you said, JOMO instead of the FOMO. And yeah, it does take time. And I think once you do put in the time to do the work, and I know we say all that, but that it's true. Once you do employ the habits and use the tools, it becomes automatic. You don't have to think about it. Do you have to always like have a game plan with your wife before you go out? Probably not anymore, right? You probably like, now we know what it is. It is what it is. I honestly think sometimes I think the bigger struggle for a lot of clients is learning how to mindfully moderate. That takes a lot of effort. Like you're always thinking, tonight I'm going to be drinking, and what does that look like, and how many times, and when do I stop, and do I get somebody to be accountable for? And when you're not drinking, it's just it's just not even on the menu, so I don't have to worry about that. So
Yeah,
was that hard for you with trying to mindfully moderate in the beginning?
Oh my gosh, it was such a failure, dude. It was so bad. So bad. No, I never, and I think about it now, I had a friend who was like, he's like, what if I could just be like your like part, like I'll hold you accountable, like I just and I'm like, well, that's not your job, dude. And people that don't have a problem don't have to ask themselves how many drinks they're gonna have. I mean, that's and so
yeah.
maybe not. I don't know.
No, I agree.
No, I
I just
mean,
thinking like it's
Like,
like, yeah,
like my wife.
if you feel like you don't have a problem, you have no problem with how alcohol shows up in your life. Yeah, you're not sitting there being like, oh,
counting.
I'm gonna have 2 tonight and only 2 and all that. You
Yeah.
probably default to that.
Yeah. No, it's way easier. Like, and I remember like there was a night where my wife's like, hey, you get 2 drinks. And I was like a sad puppy dog because I'm like, I'm 2 drinks. That's just me. I'm just getting started, And so I would rather not have anything. What's the saying? It's one's too many and 10's not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, like I said earlier,
That takes wisdom. You know what I mean? When you say what did you say? I failed, I bombed. You actually did. You may have felt like that, but you learned something. You really did.
correct.
It's data. It's more data.
Always
But
feedback.
you learn something about yourself that I'm just not that person. I'm not that guy. So, and it reinforces your choice for not drinking now. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
really good. Do you find a lot of clients come to you that want to mindfully moderate at the start, Kevin, or is it a fair share of
I think everybody. Well,
abstinence?
I mean, I guess it depends on
Where you are.
where they are in their quote unquote journey, right? Because I feel like unless something like specific happens to you where somebody tells you, or maybe it's health, or maybe it's legal,
Right.
where there's someone who's just like, you can't drink anymore. Everybody starts off by trying to cut back, right? I mean, period. I think that's
Absolutely.
99.999% of people, because it is something that's usually been in our lives for years, and we have had good times with and drinking and all of that. And so why would I totally remove that? And it makes sense, right? I'm going to try it this way first. I just need to cut it back. I just need to dial it back a bit.
Just dial it in, bro. Get out.
Like I told my therapist, I've said this before here, but it's like I'm like, I don't have an off switch, so I'm hoping that you can install a dimmer switch, because I just need to tone it down a bit. And that was the thing. I took a break, and I was always like, when can I drink next though? When can I drink next?
Right,
when am I going to be fixed?
Right.
And that's an important distinction. Yeah, that's an important distinction I do make now. More recently is like, okay, even if you take a break with alcohol, I don't care how long it is. If you take a break and you don't drink, like me, like 7 years, okay? And if I go to say, okay, I'm going to moderate now, that 7 years gave me tools for life, right? Things that I can get through without a drink and all that. But once I reintroduce alcohol, it's a different ballgame. Now, I didn't practice moderating in that time I wasn't drinking, right? So I think we always think that, because I took a break, even if it's, just like doing a dry January, doing a month, doing a week, it doesn't matter how long. It's like that helps me, but that doesn't help me necessarily once I start.
Right. Right. Well, it didn't
It's not the
go
same.
back and cure you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, not that it's like even it has to be something that's cured, because then that goes back to, do I have a disease or do I have a problem or whatever? But it's like,
No, but I do think people feel that after a month, after a year, like I'm good now. Now I
Yeah,
can do it.
yeah,
And then when you have one, you're like, wait a minute. But it is got to be fair balance to say some people do.
well,
And
yeah,
I have had successful clients that stopped drinking. They just weren't happy. And I think that's the key. It's not, you were saying, I think earlier, like it was the solution. They realized like they were unhappy. They were just unhappy drinking. They woke up, they didn't feel good. You
yeah.
mentioned the Super Bowl commercial. They don't show you the people waking up saying, I hit my wife or whatever, like the disasters that happen that potentially could happen. But I have had people that had an extended period where they were like, okay, how do we do this? And I love that because then it's like science. It's like, okay, let's do an experiment. It's got to be parameters. How many days? Put up the guardrails. And again, it goes back to what you were saying, Max. It's work. It's
It's
not
well, it's
easy.
an
You don't,
exercise. You're doing an
yeah.
yeah,
exercise.
you're
Would you
training
rather do
yourself.
a really hard workout or just not work out and get way
Yeah.
better results?
Right. Yeah. So that's why, but, and you're right. It's not everybody that can do it. I mean, yeah, I would say my success rate is not very high, but there are people, and I do support them because
Correct. Yes.
I also think it's evidence again. They might do it for a month and be like, you know what? I slipped right back to where I was, not good. And I'm like, okay, we
Yeah.
learned something.
Yeah.
You didn't,
Yeah.
nothing bad happened, but you learned something about yourself, which I think is important. And it's funny where where I noticed this? It's right around the 90-day mark when
Mm.
people have not been drinking for about 90 days. I feel like the first 30 is the recovery phase. The second 30 is more along, you're seeing the neuroplasticity. Maybe you had that pink cloud or whatever. Then when you get to 90, you forget. It's been called, is it radical nostalgia, where you're like, remember when we drank? And you're like, maybe I can do it, and then you're like, oh well, it's whatever. It's some holiday. It's plant a tree day. Let's have a drink. And then they're like, oh wow, it didn't work out.
It's like
But
90 days ago, this intruder came in, lit your house on fire, and ran away. And you got a good look at him. And then 90 days go away, and you're like, oh, that same intruder's here. Let me open the front door. Yeah, we don't recognize. We don't
Yeah.
recognize.
And over the course of that 90 days, sorry for the insurance comment here, but I got a brand new house built. Not that that's even possible in 90 days, but
we
I
get
got
it.
a
It's a
brand new
metaphor.
house built with insurance money, and everything's new. And it's like, it's all because of that guy. So
Yeah.
I feel good now. So maybe it's different. I'll let him in this time.
Well, and yeah, I think your guys' point on the moderating, I'm not anti-moderating at all.
Yeah. No, I didn't think you said that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, whatever you can do to reduce alcohol, if you notice that it's an issue, do that. Get started somewhere. And I guess for me, I did try to moderate. I did. Didn't work.
But you know what else? And I think this is part of it, is that you can join AA, you can join Reframe, you can do whatever you're going to do. Um, if it was, if you are drinking to mask something, which is what most people do, they're trying to suppress or just put a towel over an issue you don't want to deal with. When you do become sober after a while, those problems resurface. And
Correct.
if you don't meet them head on, like what you were doing, you were going to a men's meeting, you were uncovering past issues, you were dealing with them head on. If you don't do that, you're more likely to go back and drink because that was the reason you're like, oh my God, I'm going to remember this now. I don't want to deal with that. So let me call that guy who burned my house down and see
Yeah.
if he can do it again.
Well, and that's where, okay, I have a couple thoughts for people that are trying to get sober. I've heard this before because I've had some friends of friends who knew I was sober, and they had a connection, and they've reached out, and said, hey, Max, could you talk to this person? And that's happened a couple times. And one of the common themes, and would be for me too, this was what I wanted to do, it was to act like, the house that I caught on fire, so my life, that was on fire. I wanted to all of a sudden make a decision to get sober and then act like that house that I caught on fire, my life behind me, wasn't there, and go, oh, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm just going to focus on, everything's going to be great. I'm going to be so happy. And it's like, no, that is to me, that is so wrong. Why don't I had to when I sat in the reality of the decisions I had made in the life that I had created, right? It wasn't the life I wanted. When I sat in the reality of what, being a liar, not living up to my full potential, when I sat in that reality and sat with those uncomfortable feelings, that's where the transformation started. And I think that we don't want to be uncomfortable. And I started adopting uncomfortable practices. I started doing fasting and cold plunges and vigorous exercise. And I, really pushed into, okay, I want to become this new person. I'm going to let suffering in. I'm going to let it all in. I'm going to face this thing head on, and I'm going to admit where I fell short, and I'm going to own it. And I read a book. Like I said, I read books. A book I would recommend to anybody is by Jack Canfield. He wrote a book called Chicken Soup for the Soul. That's the author, but this book is called The Success Principles, and there's 66 principles in there, but there's one principle that if you don't apply it, none of the other principles work. So it's the keystone principle, and it is that we must become 100% accountable and responsible for every decision, everything that's happened in our lives. And so when I decided, okay, I'm going to be accountable, I'm going to be responsible for not only what has happened to me, but what my future is going to look like. And that is where the transformation came. It wasn't just deciding, not to drink was the first step, but it was, I'm going to be accountable here. And so, going to Reframe, men's group, counseling. I mean, I had 2 counselors, friends, family members, sponsors. Like, do whatever it takes, create an army, create a wall of people that can surround you and help you. And there's no shame in that, because we all, you know, we want what's best for the people that we love. And I feel like there's a stigma in the older generation for getting help.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yes,
I
yes.
think, well, admitting you have mental health issues, or admitting you have addiction issues is very stigmatizing for many people and for many reasons. And it transcends not only age, but cultures. There are certain cultures where you don't admit weakness, particularly among men. And I think what you were saying, if I can rephrase it, is almost like you were leaning into the shame. You weren't avoiding it. You were like, all right, I'm going to do these plunges. I'm going to feel all the feelings. And when you were describing it, I was like, that's called accountability. And then you were like, that's what it is. And I was like, yeah, that really is what it is. It's so funny. It goes back over and over and over again. People come to Reframe and they're wrecked. They're they're displaced. They feel detached. They feel distraught. And it's really sad. And then when you get past a certain hump, which is not very far into the future, you realize, well, the alcohol is not the problem at all. It was never the problem. It was the vehicle I used to help me get where I wanted to be. And it always comes down to, I'm misaligned with the values I hold dear in myself. And you were saying, I've turned into a liar. I'm not being accountable to my wife, all the things you hold dear. And then once you realize that shift, I get it. It's almost like you find the last piece of the puzzle. You're like, I get it now. It fits. I'm really just better off not drinking because I'm more aligned with my core values, which are more aligned with what I hold dear, which is my health, it sounds like, and sounds like your wife. And now you got a baby. So that's really great. It really is. It takes a while, but there, like you said, you don't know the life you could have unless you start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What would you say, talking about all like that army of support around you, that group? So what would you say to somebody who you're telling this to and who's like, I can do it myself. I can figure it out. I know my issues. I can do it myself. I don't like to ask for help or things like that. What's the argument against I'll lead it and say stubbornness.
I wouldn't argue with somebody like that because they're not
Yeah.
ready.
Well, no, and it's not like arguing, but like, what would you
What's
come
the
back to them?
counter?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's the counter as to why they should do that? Perhaps. What's the benefit?
You're saying somebody is saying I can do it myself.
Well, they just heard you share like all the people.
Mhm.
Like, that sounds like a lot of work, and I don't like to ask for help. I like to do it myself.
Yeah.
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 You
No,
know what mine is? I'll go for before you
yeah,
so you could think.
there you go.
This happens in not often, but there will be that first encounter, and you know I'm talking about, Kevin, where people come in and they think you're going to wave a wand and it's all going to be great. And you say, this is what we need to do. This is what we need to do. And they go, you know what? I don't know if this is for me. I typically could do everything on my own. And I go, okay, great. Why don't we agree to, let's see how you do in a week. And if you're where you're at and you're happy, you're feeling like you're going in the right direction, then go for it. But I'm still here if you need me, because you're right, Max, and I'll let you, I'll shut up. But
No,
you can't
no.
argue because
No, yeah.
they're already in their mind thinking, the door is shut. I'm not doing this. And you just say, okay, call me in a week and tell me if you're where you're at, because all you need is another week and you'll see. But I don't say that part.
No, I mean, you guys are the coaches, so you guys know way more than me. But I mean, I would say, yeah, call me in a month, call me in a week. I've always said that I don't want to get into my family life too much, but I don't have a lot of contact with my family. And I've always said that, I'm not going to go beat on their door and explain, you know, hey, this is what your life could look like. But if anybody ever asks me, hey, how do I, how do I get a life that I love? And life isn't, I don't always love my life. Life is hard, you know. It's just a lot harder when you're a drunk. um, but anybody, because if somebody comes to me and asks me, it tells me that, hey, they really want help. And somebody that's not asking you how to get help, and I know some people just maybe they want help, but they don't know how to say it. So you could reach out and offer that help. I don't think there's anything wrong with offering that help, but and maybe this is more towards family. I feel like the more you know somebody, the less likely they are to open up to you.
Yeah,
That's
maybe.
probably another topic for another podcast.
But it is tricky. I mean, it is tricky. Also, the tricky part is, first of all, somebody has to ask for help, right? You have to want help. The second part that I find is very tricky is when you get somebody and they're not rock bottom, but they're low, they're more apt to listening, and then all of a sudden, something magical happens. They don't drink for a few days and they think, oh, I got this. And then they fall by the wayside. And it breaks my heart, actually, because I feel like they just slipped back into the old pattern, and it's very easy to do that. And I think that's the same thing with people when you try to give help, or when somebody, I don't know if this happened to you, where they were like, could you talk to my husband, or could you talk to my friend? And you're like, I could. I don't really know what good it's going to do, other than I'm here if they want to talk, but they should probably make the first move, because it's
Yeah.
can be seen as aggressive.
I I had a husband reach out to me and they had children, and I just said, "Hey, like your wife's job is to get sober. Your job is to make sure your kids are safe." And we ended up connecting, and it ended up, I don't know, she's probably a couple years sober now. But um I think that, for them, it was really interesting because, like, the husband kind of knew that it was an issue, but they didn't really know. And I was like, hey, like, I want you to know that this is not good. And if the alcohol stays in the house, it's probably not going to go well because there had been lots of issues. So,
And this is already at the point where like she was working on this, and you kind of brought that up as far as like, okay, maybe you don't have that in the
uh,
house.
she, yeah, yeah. So I don't think I think she had tried to stay away from it, like maybe moderate on her own, and it didn't work. And then, you know, there were issues that kept happening. And so, but now she's doing really well now. I mean, I see her Facebook posts, and it's really cool to see um how far she's come.
How much do you think, you said your background is in health. as well. How much do you think health plays into most people's reason to stop or to moderate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more
I'm
now.
3 for 3 today with the questions.
Yeah. Well, I would say, in today's day and age, with the science and everything that's coming out, you look at the national heart, the heart, I'm slipping on the words. They used to say like one glass of wine
Yeah, 1
for
or 2.
one or two, and now
Yeah.
it's zero, I believe.
0, yeah, the World Health
Zero.
Organization.
World Health
Yeah,
Org Thank you. Yeah.
because they went back and they looked at that S curve and they were like, "No, no, no, no. Actually, that doesn't make any
And it
sense."
says sponsored by Budweiser.
But,
More drink! Oh my
is that
gosh!
isn't that funny?
Sorry.
But it really people bought into that. And listen, we all know that I've talked about this before with Kevin. I just came back from Germany. On average, people in Germany drink a liter and a half of beer a day. My mother has a glass of wine, but it's like this big with dinner. I think it was falling into this idea that people were living longer and they happened to be drinkers. It had nothing to do with the science, that the fact that it causes problems with your heart, it causes problems with your liver, it's carcinogenic. So then the World Health Organization finally came around and said, actually, it's 0. So you're
Yeah.
right.
And I would say that, I think there's lots of people I know that were like, I just don't drink anymore because I sleep better and I feel better. And as I think a lot of people recognize that, they didn't have a problem with it, but the one or two drinks they would have, a couple times a week, they would notice, hey, I'm not sleeping well. I mean, you would talk about just wrecking your REM sleep. It's
Not only that, it's exponentially worse as you get older. You're drinking at 65 versus 50 versus 40, one glass of wine, forget about hard liquor. I mean, the impact it, no, I mean, the impact it has on people. And not to mention, there's a new fad that's coming out and I was asked to comment on it. It's called buzz balls. There are these round, spherical, colorful, fruity drinks that have 15% alcohol. And the Gen Zers who don't really drink, they're probably the most sober conscious, although they do smoke a lot of marijuana in replacement of the alcohol. They're doing it to down it. I mean, this isn't something you sip. And so they were asking, what is the impact of that? And I'm like, it's a disaster. You don't want to be drinking 15% alcohol in one shot, and imagine the impact. And what is really problematic for this type of intentional, intensive drinking is that it's the fruity part. You don't realize how, this is an impact. There's a lot of alcohol, but you're like, oh, this tastes really good. It tastes like, it reminds me of like when the vapes were fruit flavored and
Yeah.
kids were like, oh, I love this. I'm like, yeah, it's masking all
Yeah.
the dangers
There's no
because
barrier for entry, like, smoking a cigarette or
yeah,
drinking rot gut,
you're drinking
whatever
straight vodka.
alcohol.
Yeah.
Or I was just talking to somebody about my Mad Dog college phase.
I've heard about this.
Yeah, there's no like barrier, even if it's like a White Claw versus the Buzz Ball. It's like it's still or
Yeah.
whatever drinks like that. I don't mean to call out specifics, but it's like, yeah, like it's just easy now. It's
And not
easier.
only that, talk about nutrition. You're now adding the two most addictive things, sugar and alcohol, into one lovely beverage. I mean, it is, but this is becoming something of a problem. I think there's even a song called Buzz Balls, but I think this is what happens
Naturally.
when, of course, this is what happens when you have generational drinking or generational celebrating, like you would say, or traditions. Eventually, certainly my nephews probably don't drink like I did. Then the nephews that come after them are probably not going to. And so what happens? The marketing ramps up. So they go to TikTok where they make them fun and fruity and like, let's just have one, but you got to have it all at once. So the marketing is catching up to even the habits. And still, even after the COVID pandemic, where people weren't congregating as much, we talked about this last time. The one essential, what was it? Alcohol. So, I
Yeah.
think, yeah,
Yeah.
it's really problematic. So even sometimes, even when there's undisputed facts about what alcohol is doing to you, people overlook it or they
Yeah.
doubt it.
I mean, I was, in the health and fitness industry. I have a degree in exercise science, so I knew, but I didn't care because,
Yeah, I know.
I can always find data that supports what I want to do.
yeah,
But you
exactly.
were also showing up. See, I think that's where people make the distinction. Oh, I got wrecked last night, but I still made it to work. I still
Right.
put in a full 8 hours and I did a good job. Now I
Which
deserve a drink.
probably made
Well,
it weight
yeah,
because it just reinforced the fact that, oh, I
Yeah,
could do that,
I could
even
do
though
it.
it was wrecking my insides.
well, we all come up with our own justification system, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
hey, if I'm not, if I'm making all my meetings, I'm making all my phone calls, I'm doing my workouts,
Hmm.
I'm not beating anybody or wrecking my car. Hey, I don't have a problem. If I had a problem, someone would get hurt. And
Or if
all
I
the
had a problem, my boss would have said something to me. So
Yeah.
therefore, I'm fine. Yeah, it's like,
and
yeah, you put it on
I
right.
drink
somebody
my
else.
alcohol out of a glass, not a brown paper bag. It's
Yeah, yeah.
fine.
Well, and that's like I remember telling I had a conversation with my grandmother recently, and she knows. I told her, hey, I'm sober, and she was like, you weren't that bad. Like it wasn't that bad. And I'm like, no, grandma, your version of an alcoholic is the homeless dude underneath the interstate with the brown paper bag, saying,
Yeah,
hey,
but she also loves you though, because she doesn't want to think she may have done something to make it go wrong for you. It's just a loving
and
way of
that's
saying you weren't so
Or
bad.
make you
that's
feel
a really
better.
good point, Frank. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, it's hard for parents. When I went to my niece's wedding, I had intentions of having a glass of champagne. I thought, oh, I'm going to give myself a glass of champagne. Then we went and I was like, you know what? I'm having such a good time. Why ruin this? Why make it all of a sudden mental gymnastics? And I was purposely drinking non-alcoholic beer so it looked like I was drinking because, in my mind I'm thinking everybody's staring at me and my mother goes, "Oh, have a drink. It's okay." And I'm like, oh God, my poor mother. She doesn't want to think about maybe her son shouldn't be drinking at all. But I just said,
Yeah,
no, it's okay. I'm having a great time. Don't worry.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Mothers and grandmothers, you gotta love them. Well, I know we have to stop at 5. Do you want to do our nuggets,
Yeah. Was there anything
Kevin?
else that you wanted to, that
Yeah,
you feel
anything
like
else?
you needed to, not needed to, but like wanted to touch
Yeah, what
on
else you'd
or
like to share for
share?
anybody out there? Yeah.
I felt like I had one more thing, but I might be slipping my mind. I think that this is reframe such a helpful tool, and this platform saves lives. It does, and you guys, coaches, you guys are the heroes, taking your time to invest in people like me, who thought my best days were behind me, and they're not. And guys, I have such a successful business that I'm running, a wonderful wife, a child who I, get to show up for every single day. And gosh, and it really did. I downloaded, I think, you guys were running like a beginning of the year special. I think that's when I downloaded it. It was like December 31st or January 1st. And I went, I'm in. I'm going to be a reframer. And I got enough points to get this shirt.
Yeah.
And that
Wow.
every time I put on the shirt, I have, it's like a piece of home, like I came home to myself through Reframe. So yeah, if you're somebody that wants to cut back, wants to quit drinking, just, I would just say, what's the worst that can happen? You find out that, you didn't like it. I don't know. I mean, maybe you get your life back. I mean, I think those are,
Yeah.
could go one way or the other, give it a shot, so
Give it a
Yeah.
shot and try. I mean, and just a shout out to you for like, okay, nope, waking up that Sunday morning and being like,
Right. Right.
not doing this, and then immediately going and saying, I need help. What meetings do you have? And it's not just one thing. Like there's no magic I'll say there's no magic pill, but it's not about pills either. It's about, it
Magic
could
wand.
be a pill, but there's no one thing that just magically works, right? And it's like, because we said, it's like, there's different reasons why I reach for a drink here and here and here and here and here. So there's going to be different things I need to help me with that.
Sure.
You know?
And just so, I want to just say, thank you and very well said. But I want to also say, and I'll speak for Kevin, the relationship with coaches and the reframers is bi-directional. I get just as much out of every meeting, every engagement. It really feeds my soul. So I'm glad that you get a lot out of it, but we get just as much in return.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know where I would be right now as far with respect to alcohol if it wasn't for reframing a different way. But
Right.
yeah. Well, all right. Well, thanks, Max. What were some of the things I was looking up here on the side? You were close, Frank.
Yeah.
I thought it was just me,
I
but
thought it was
but
just
it
me.
isn't.
That's the book, but it isn't.
Yeah,
It's a long title.
making the journey from what will people think to I am enough. That's Brene Brown's book that you mentioned.
Right.
I was looking up something, Max. You said something about the demon and I remember I couldn't find it really quickly in a search, but like the whole etymology of like alcohol or something, is like something about a spirit there and stuff. So I wasn't able to get that. But then I was going to mention you talked about Jack Canfield's book, and
Yeah.
I read the 30-day sobriety solution: how to cut back or quit drinking in the privacy of your own home early on. And that was, I thought, a
Yeah.
helpful book because it had a lot of new tools that I learned from there. And I think there's one other thing I was looking up. I was looking up generations and when they started and ended and all that. Because at one point, Frank, I was going to say, because you said like Gen Z doesn't like the word alcoholic or that. I was going to be like, Gen X doesn't like it either.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants that label, and that's fine. Like, I tell people, just say you don't drink. It's nobody's business.
Yeah. And if the
Please,
label
yeah, we can
works,
get into a whole,
go
yeah,
for
some
it.
people fall into that trap of the identity. They need to be
Yeah.
an alcoholic,
Yeah.
but
Well, it's
if
the
it gets you
unknown.
through
It's
the
like,
night.
if that's part of my identity now, like, who am I without this? How do I
Right.
deal with stress if I'm not drinking? It's just like that unknown. So, all right.
Gosh,
No.
this was so much fun.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you so
So,
much for sharing your story. It's going to be very
yeah.
helpful, especially for a lot of people. So appreciate that.
And that leads us to, what did you learn this week?
The nugget.
True to form, I got nothing. I'm going to think about it in the next 30 seconds. This could be completely off topic, not sobriety related at all, but what's a little nugget for the listeners? What's something that you said like, I didn't know about that, or I just learned that this week. Anything
I
come
got
to
mine.
mind?
Yeah, I got mine. So I guess I'm going to date this because we have Mother's Day coming up. And I always I don't really think about it. But, the other day, somebody said something to me. They said, mother is also a verb. You can be very mothering. And I gave me a lot of appreciation for my mother. She's 90. I never had a grandmother, but my niece became a mother. So my sister is a grandmother and my mother is a great grandmother, which makes me a great uncle. And so it made me really just step back and think, wow, all these women in my life, because, how they nurtured me. I was the only boy and I had two older sisters. And I really think in my own life, in the way I approached medicine, was very much like a mother. I feel like I mother my dog, like I'm the mother of the dog, and I feel like I don't have any sort of shame or stigma about saying that. And I think if anything, my nugget is going to be, I'm going to celebrate my mother better than I may have had in the past years and really let her know it. So if you do have a mother or you have somebody that is a mother to you, I suggest you do the same this week. So that's my nugget.
I'm not following that.
All right. Oh, come on, Max. You got a nugget for us? You probably got tons.
Well, so I read this book. This doesn't really have to do with sobriety, but like you were
Yeah,
talking
no.
about generations, and it's called Reparenting the Inner Child. It's a new book, Dr. Nicole LaPera. It's the new science of our oldest wounds and how to heal them. But
Love that.
yeah, but she talked in there about the generations that came before you. And I think about my grandmother who I spoke about earlier. She's 100% German. She grew up in Germany, and I think about her parents and where they come from. And because we are a byproduct of the generations that have come before us, right? We carry that DNA from generation to generation to generation. And there are some qualities and skills that I have, some gifts that I have. Well, one of those is I'm very relational, and I get that from the generations from before me, my personality, my DNA. And so my nugget, I guess, would be is, because we like to focus on the things that are wrong with us. We have a negative bias, right? It's to keep ourselves safe. But what if we what I thought about focusing on the good qualities that I have that have come from the generations before me, and being grateful and thankful to them. And I don't know, that was a really fun practice for me to just share some appreciation for. Because I would love to hear stories from like my great great
Right.
great grandfather. Like, what was life like? I'm sure you could do enough research with the internet today to figure that out. But to hear the stories from them, well, I'll never get to do that. Um, so I don't know if that's part of your like getting into your 30s, your late 30s, where you start to think about stuff like that. I feel like an old person, like being like,
Yeah, but just think, you'll be able to do this now for your daughter and your grandchildren
yeah,
because of everything that you take it forward, I think, in a lot of ways. So that's something that you hold value. You'll do it now for your generations to come.
yeah, yeah. And I also, I'm thinking about my legacy. Like, what do I want? What are the generations after me gonna say? And I'm writing that story today. And it's, the thing about sobriety is I remember, and maybe I'm getting off track, but I remember early on going, how am I gonna be sober for like a month? Holy crap, a month is a long time. And I remember just joining a meeting. They're like, just do today. Just today. Just don't drink. You could think about drinking tomorrow, but today, just don't drink. And then you get, that's how it's done. And so the decisions we make on a daily basis will affect our legacy.
Yeah. And that's like getting away from like specific goals, specific outcomes. Not that goals and focusing on that stuff isn't good. It's just we focus on that. I have to do 30 days. I have to do this long. I have to do forever. But you can't do that. And you can't do that today. Like, how am I going to? And so when we get overwhelmed, we think like, oh, well, I can't do that. So I'm just going to stop today. Versus, yeah, maybe I'm shooting for that, but why am I doing it? And can I do that today? Can I focus on my why and my reason today? Because, yeah, you stole my. I'm flipping through my bullet journal here that I just, I was like, oh, I'll share about, like, I just started doing gratitude journaling again. I'm like, one thing a day, one line a day here, I'm going to add. And I'm like, of course, you talk about gratitude. And I'm like, all right, now I got to scramble and find something else here.
It's low hanging.
Well, you
Yeah.
wanted to go last.
I didn't want to go last. I just didn't have anything yet. But I will share a quote that I read recently that I like. And it's something that everybody knows, at least part of it. But yeah, the gratitude thing is good. I was reading, what's it called? Show Your Work. No, I'm reading Show Your Work. I read Keep Going by Austin Kleon. More for related to creativity and writing and doing things like that. But his books are great. They're short, engaging, cool. A lot of good tidbits for life. But this one he had a quote from Abraham Lincoln in there, and it said, "It is said, an Eastern monarch once charged his wise men to invent him a sentence to be ever in view, and which should be true and appropriate in all times and situations. They presented him the words, and this too shall pass away. And he said how much it expresses, how chastening in the hour of pride, how consoling in the depths of affliction, and this too shall pass away. So, but yeah, I always remember seeing that actor thing with Tom Hanks and Robert De Niro, and I don't know what that was for, but Tom Hanks is sitting there. He's like, I wish I knew this earlier in my life. He's like, this too shall pass. He's like, things are good, things are bad, things aren't going well. This too shall pass. Things are going great. You're on top of the world. This too shall pass.
It's very humbling.
And helpful, I think, because especially whenever we're struggling, right? It's not going to last. These things don't last forever. I don't know if that was a nugget, but it was a recent nugget
Good. Well, it was a nugget because I didn't know the origin, so thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Me neither. All right, I'm using it. All right. Thanks, Max. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
Any parting words from either of you that you'd like to share?
I'll share.
Pleasure meeting you.
Hey, you too. I hope we get to talk again.
Sure.
I'll share my favorite quote by Albert Einstein, and he said, "Your imagination is the preview of life to come."
Good. Frank, you got a quote? Round out.
No, I don't. Don't put me on the spot. I think that's a good one to end with. That was good. Okay.
Great. Thank you all for listening to another episode of the Reframable podcast, brought to you by the Reframe app. Reframe is the #1 iOS and Android app to help you cut back or quit drinking alcohol. It uses neuroscience to reframe your relationship with alcohol and unlock the healthiest, happiest you. If you're enjoying this podcast, please like, subscribe, and share with those that you feel may benefit from it. And I want to thank you again for listening, and be sure to come back for another episode. Have a great day.